Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So I'm very excited to do this video today. We are doing part 2 of my 5 books that were very overhyped, that weren't worth the hype. I really enjoy doing these, but I do have to space out when I can do them because I can't always read everything that's super overhyped and know from the get-go that it's not going to be worth the hype. There have been many books that have come out this year that were very well talked about, and there was so much anticipation before they came out that I really thought they were all going to be either very astounding or complete letdowns, and I think I only really had 2, maybe 3 that really let me down. 2 of them will be on this list. So I really want to talk about books that so many people seem to love and praise, and then when I got to them, I was just like, what? Like, people adore this? Why? Again, as always, these are just my opinions. If you love these books, power to you. I'm glad that they worked for you. I'm glad that somebody enjoyed them. And I actually have a book on this list that I did actually like, I just don't think was worth how much love and praise that it gets, and I will talk about that when I get there. But yes, these are just my opinions. If you love these books, that's awesome. Very happy for you. These just, they didn't work for me. So let's start off with the obvious choice. This is Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. If you watched my October wrap-up, you know I hated this book. I despised this book. I thought this was some of the most pretentious, laziest storytelling ever presented in front of me because it's like 125 pages and I still couldn't tell you what the plot of this story is. I couldn't tell you what the characters' motives are. I couldn't tell you exactly what was going on or why or how or pretty much anything other than the fact that the wallpaper in the story gets a hell of a lot more development than the characters do. This book was on my, one of my most anticipated books of 2021, and I spent about 10 months really excited for this because I thought it was going to be Japanese folklore told through a modern lens, and I thought it was going to be very interesting and very scary because look at this cover. This is a scary cover. I'm not even going to read the inside of this book and tell you what this book is about because I'm not sure. And I don't even think the back of this book would tell me what this is about. Story that I get from it is that like a group of 5 people, I think, are going ghost hunting in a haunted house that they're not 100% sure if it's haunted or not, and they all kind of hate each other, and they're all like frenemies in this weird kind of circle, and somebody might be getting married, and everybody might be jealous that they're getting married, and there may be ghosts. I think. I don't know. There's a lot of kitsune in this, which is kind of cool, except this book doesn't talk at all about what a kitsune is. There's a lot of other monsters or like Japanese creatures in here. I think they have oni. But if I didn't actually know what a kitsune was, this book does nothing to help me visualize a kitsune. It's just like assuming the reader knows that a kitsune is like a 9-tailed fox. I think it's a 9-tailed fox. I might be confusing that with Nine-Tails. But it is like a mythical fox in Japanese folklore. And it just like, maybe it's there, maybe it's on the wallpaper, maybe it's moving, maybe it's not. I don't know. I don't have any certainties about this book because this book was absolute trash. This is my most hated book that I read that came out in 2021. It is not my most hated book of the year. That will not be taken from The Witching Hour by Anne Rice. I don't think any book can infuriate me as much as that book did. But yeah, Nothing But Blackened Teeth was probably my biggest letdown. I had really high hopes for this book, and it had such potential, like Japanese folklore through a modern horror lens. That's awesome. Japanese horror films are like the scariest horror films. Like, I think that's pretty much accepted. Japanese horror is terrifying, and this could have been amazing, and it's just lazy, poorly written. It reads like a draft. Like, where was the editor to be like, you don't have a story here. You've got an outline of things and ideas, and just nothing really happened. I don't know. I hated that book. I'm sorry. I actually haven't found a single person who really liked this book, at least like not in my like Bookstagram community. So there's that. I feel like it was really hyped up by Tor Nightfire, and then when people actually got their hands on it, everybody was like, what did I just read? So yeah, big letdown. Anyway, next up, Bird Box I've talked about Bird Box on my channel before. This is the book that made Josh Malerman pretty famous. It's, as you can see, been adapted into a film on Netflix. And this book just didn't quite work for me. The premise of this book is it's a post-apocalyptic story where there are these creatures. If you see them, they cause you to kill yourself, and a bunch of people have holed up in a house together trying to kind of keep them blinded to the outside world while still trying to survive. Interesting concept, not executed very well. This book has so many plot holes in order to make the monster function the way it does and to make the characters survive in the way that they do. I didn't have enough suspension of disbelief for this book to actually capture and captivate me. I'm all about, like, suspension of disbelief. If you tell me that there are a bunch of these monsters that if you see them you will go crazy and die, that's fine. I can 100% get on board. But if the logic you've set up for the world all of a sudden has these like moments where you can bend that logic to make your story work, that's when I started to have a lot of issues. And I just felt like the storyline in Bird Box really banked on a lot of plot holes and a lot of bent logic to make the characters survive or die in the way that they did, and it just irritated me. I also found Mallory to be a very dislikable character, our main character. I know that Malerman's really trying to create her as like this strong, independent female, like almost like survivalist warrior type. Like she really has an edge to her, but it was just an edge that I didn't believe. This isn't really a spoiler, but there are children in the book, and she only refers to them as boy or girl. She doesn't give them names, and I think it's kind of to show like how hardened she's become, but like, I didn't buy that. Give the kids names. Like, I thought it was so bizarre. And I just didn't like Mallory as a character. But, okay, so I can hate on Bird Box a lot. I do want to give praise to Josh Malerman when I say that there is a scene in this book that's really watered down and altered in the film adaptation that is so unnerving and terrifying and creepy and unsettling and slightly predictable, but even though that it is predictable, the whole time you're like, I really hope that doesn't happen, I really hope that doesn't happen. And Josh Malerman nailed captivating horror in that. Which is why I continued to read Malerman, and I read Goblin later this year after reading that, and I loved Goblin. I loved a lot of the short stories in Goblin. I didn't love Goblin as a whole, but I liked it enough that I would want to keep reading Malerman, but this book just wasn't worth the hype for me. I think this was a 3-star read for me. Read it if you're interested in Bird Box. I wouldn't say it's better than the film. I wouldn't say it's worse than the film. They're kind of on equal footing because a lot of the stuff that the film changes elevates the problematic parts of the book, but a lot of the parts that the film leaves out were the best parts of the book. So do with that what you will. Oh, I bet people saw this one coming. Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. This was a 3-star read for me, and after I finished it, I was like, all right, I guess that was an okay book. Didn't hate it. The more I think about this book, the more I dislike this book. And that's primarily because I really like Grady Hendrix, and I just don't think this was anywhere up to the level of writing and creativity and humor that Grady Hendrix is supposed to have, especially when we had My Heart is a Chainsaw come out earlier this year, which is like Stephen Graham Jones's love letter to slasher films, and then you have Grady Hendrix's love letter to slasher films. One really just pales in comparison to the others. Oh, I don't know. But Grady Hendrix, Final Girl Support Group. This is kind of the idea of what happens to final girls after the slasher film and how they have to mentally cope with having survived the slasher film, and then all of a sudden they find out that a murderer is coming to slash up the remaining final girls. This had so much potential to be awesome, but just like Bird Box, this was filled with dislikable main characters who made very stupid, questionable decisions, and I just could not get on board with this. Our main character is so freaking unlikable and so freaking unrealistic that the whole time I was reading this, I was just like, sweet love of God, please, please choose somebody else to focus on. It was so boring. And it doesn't help that the main character is the only character that's kind of based off of a lesser known horror film. People, like the characters in this are all supposed to be like the survivors of like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween. And our main character is the survivor of Silent Night, Deadly Night, and she's actually not even based off the final girl. She's based off of like a side character. I don't know. I've never even seen Silent Night, Deadly Night, and I've seen a lot of horror movies. So the fact that she was based off of that really took like my connectability away from her. And I kind of wonder if that was like Grady Hendrix's attempt to build out his own slasher film. But if that was the case, make the whole thing up. Right? Like, don't bite off everything else. Like, you bite off Scream, you bite off Gremlins, you bite off, like, all of the greats. But you choose Silent Night, Deadly Night? Like, I don't know. It was just not at the caliber that I expect from Grady Hendrix. The level of horror was toned down. The level of humor was toned down. His love of nostalgia was toned down. I think this book took place in, like, 2010, which isn't as, like, far away as, like, Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires being in the 90s or My Best Friend's Exorcism being in the 80s. But there's still enough of nostalgia from the 2010s that he really could have played that time period up, and he just didn't. And I think the only reason it was even set in the 2010s is so survivors of 80s and 90s horror movies wouldn't be too old to continue to be like fight or flight slasher girls. Yeah, and it was just a letdown. It was a letdown. It's not a bad book. But the more I think about it, the more I dislike it, especially in comparison to his other works. So, he's got a new book coming out in 2022, so hopefully he'll redeem himself. All right, next up. I feel like I have to throw one of these in all of these videos, just because Stephen King is my favorite author, and I don't want to be the person who's like, I love Stephen King, he can do nothing wrong. No, Stephen King has some bad books. So far, I believe there are 5 novels by Stephen King that I was not a fan of. I talked about why I didn't like Revival in my last overhyped books. But today we're going to talk about Cujo, because everybody seems to love Cujo, and I hate Cujo. Oh, I hate Cujo. If I read this book not knowing it was by Stephen King, I would think this was a bad book. This is a book filled with unlikable characters. This is a book filled with really ridiculous plot points. And it preys upon the reader's like assumed love of dogs, right? Like, we can assume that most people probably love dogs, and that your household pet turning against you is a terrifying concept. Yes, I totally am on board with that. Very disturbing to read. This book really has very, very, very little to do with the dog. The dog scenes are probably the highlights of the book, but beyond that, there's literally no likable characters except for one. And he's a little boy, and he's not even the little boy that's like in danger in the car for most of the book. He's like the neighbor's kid. And he's the only rational, intelligent one in the whole book. And he's probably got the least amount of like screen time or like book time, whatever. And then there's a weird subplot about like cereal. I think it's cereal advertisements or cereal jingles or something like that. And it's just all over the place, and out of nowhere the ghost of a serial killer is just like in a closet. And when I read that, I was like, this is really weird, right? But it's a Castle Rock book, so it's like connecting back to the Dead Zone. This book is so all over the place, and it's just like, it's such an un-Stephen King book. And it doesn't surprise me at all that Stephen King was so like coked out of his mind that he doesn't remember writing Cujo, and he's really talked about that. And I'll give him that this is probably why this book doesn't read like a Stephen King book, the reason I don't connect with this. Because he really wasn't in his best state of mind to write it, and he clearly doesn't remember writing it. But this one is just, and I know a lot of people love this book, and I just can't figure out why. Like, the scariest part of this book is the premise, but it doesn't even, like, harp on the premise here. And it's just got so many weird subplots and strange, unlikable characters, and I couldn't vibe with this one, and I really wanted to. Cujo had been on my list for a while to read because it is considered one of those like Stephen King classics, and the film adaptation is supposed to be amazing. I haven't seen it, but yeah, no, Cujo did not do it for me, not at all, and that's such a bummer. Like, it really didn't feel like a Stephen King story. The characters, I couldn't connect with pretty much any of them, and I feel like in a lot of Stephen King stories, his characters are his strongest points. And I can always find one character that I can really, really connect with. And in this, I couldn't stand any of them. Ugh. I had like no pity for the ending. It's a tragic ending. I'm not going to say what happens, but I just couldn't care. I was just happy to be done with the book. So there's that. Okay, and last but not least, I want to preface this one with, I like this book. Please don't get mad at me for not liking this book. I like this book. This is the book that I actually genuinely like that's on this list, but it is overhyped and I want to talk about it. And that is The Terror by Dan Simmons. Ooh, this book took me so long to read. I read this over pretty much the entire course of 2020. I started in, I think, March of 2020, right when everything happened in lockdown, and I finished it in December of 2020. This book is not easy to read. This is a fictionalized horror supernatural retelling of the HMS Terror, HMS Erebus Franklin exhibition up into the Arctic Circle in the 1800s that never returned. And this is a super cool concept, and this is a super cool book, and I understand why so many people like and recommend it. This is not an easy book to read. This is one of those books that has what I like to call like the Hemingway effect, where like you're gonna read about what like the window on a ship looks like for like 10 pages, and it's just gonna keep going. You're gonna learn more about scurvy than you would in like, I don't know, like a high school textbook. There's so much historically accurate information dumped into this book that you really have to be in the mood to learn everything you want about like 1800s British exploration ships. There's so much of that. They go into like the scientific like biology understanding of like polar bears. There's so much, and while it adds to this story, it really makes this difficult to read. And a lot of people always talk about how like this is a perfect winter setting book. This is like a perfect book to start off with Dan Simmons. I don't know if I agree with that. This isn't a book I would recommend to somebody unless they've already adamantly been a fan of Dan Simmons or they're adamantly a fan of really intense historical fiction. This is not the book that you like grab a horror fan and you're like, yo, you're gonna love this. Because it's work to get through. It is a lot of work to get through. It is worth it in the end. I don't necessarily adore the ending. Gets kind of weird and questionable and strange. But it's a really cool story, and I know a lot about this exhibition. And it was really cool because as I was reading this, I would start reading like the historical information about what actually happened and kind of comparing the two. And this worked way more efficiently than, say, like The Hunger by Alma Katsu, which was on my list of overhyped books previously, of like just failing as historical fiction. I thought this really, really nailed it. But I don't think this is a book that everybody is going to want to read. And I think that's where this becomes really, really overhyped. And I can see why a lot of people don't like it. I do not love this book. I do like this book, but it is definitely a trek, a voyage, a journey to get through. And I just think that this book needs that little footnote when people recommend it to you. And I don't think people do, because that's how I found it. And I remember I had to put it down. I put it down for several months because I found it so tedious to get through. And then it finally does start to pick up towards the middle. You got to get to the middle, and then you can, you know, still kind of trudge your way through it, but it's a lot easier because, you know, there's more like monsters jumping around. But yes, so those are my 5 more overhyped books that weren't worth the hype. And I'm excited to find out what 2022 is going to have in store for me. There's a lot of books that are being talked about right now that I'm very interested in reading. Currently reading a book that might end up on this list next time, so we will see how that goes. Anyways, as always, I post every Monday, Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays. It's pretty much always Saturdays now. I've said that before, that I'm kind of doing that. I can probably tell you right now I won't be posting on Christmas, which is a Saturday, and probably not on New Year's either, which is a Saturday. But you can probably bank on most Saturdays having post. And as always, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Mwah!